Brilliant. Okay then, if everybody's ready to go, I guess without further ado, we shall dive in. So very briefly, my name's Will Freeman. I'm a freelance video games and technology journalist from the UK. And considering that's all I do, that's all I need to say about me, really. Here are our experts who actually know what they're talking about, and I'm going to be asking the questions. But first of all, just a little context. Thank you for coming to this panel when we have a slightly cryptic panel title of Swimming in a Red Ocean. So just for a little context before we start, and I guess I'm ideally qualified because I'm neither a business person or an entrepreneur, so I can give you a layperson's description of the blue and red ocean distinction, which is the idea of a blue ocean is an entirely new field or new industry or new technology where innovation helps you stand out because there isn't enough involvement from other people for there to be much competition. A red ocean, by contrast, is any existing industry, you could argue, and thus somewhere you have to stand out through competition. And so we're going to talk about many kinds of gaming forms, but I guess a lot of it will emphasize on mobile because that's probably the toughest red ocean there is, in that there's quite a lot of competition. So of course we're talking about discoverability. I think that's enough of my waffling. So what I'll do is, I guess the first thing is to welcome our experts, and then I will get them to introduce themselves. So welcome. Yeah, come on, join in. Just a brief introduction of kind of where you are now in these industries and what you've done previously would be great. So I'm afraid, Jana, kicking off with you.
Hi, my name is Jana Palm, and I'm running a Swedish non-profit games accelerator called Stugan. I've been there for over 2 years now, and I've seen a lot of games companies, indies companies emerging out of there, and I'm also often a judge in games competitions, so I've seen a lot of indie startups.
Hi, I'm Otter. I originally come from CCP Games, but the last 3 years I've been running a gaming studio in Berlin, Germany. We just released our first title called Rerunners to critical acclaim. So I have some insights into getting that out. And now we're kind of moving on to our next project.
Hi, I'm Thor. I'm the founder and CEO of Plain Vanilla. They are the makers of a very popular trivia game an app called QuizUp. QuizUp became incredibly popular, one of the fastest moving apps ever that appeared on the App Store, with over 80 million registered users. However, right now we're in the process of selling QuizUp to a US gaming company, and we're winding down Plain Vanilla here in Iceland. So, yeah. Okay.
Always brings his own mic.
Jonas Antonsson. I'm one of the nut jobs behind the unpublished Raw Fury, which is a PC-first, premium-only, small publishing unit of 5 people. Previous to that, I used to work at Paradox Interactive. I worked for an American company called Meteor Entertainment. And then I set up a company here in Iceland many years ago called Gogogic, which did the traditional VC funding route with all the fun stuff that comes with that. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Sean. I'm the Chief Corporate Development Officer at Wargaming. I manage broader strategy, investments, acquisitions, strategic partnerships, new markets, and other things like that. Basically stuff that people who do real work don't look at, so I do that. Prior to Wargaming, I was doing similar kinds of things at a small Chinese startup called Tencent. So that was in Shenzhen, China. A lot of wonderful minerals in the air. Wargaming, as some of you may know, we started off doing PC games, PC box games a long time ago. We found success with World of Tanks on the PC. It's a free-to-play online game. And we've since moved on to console and mobile and kind of feel the pain very aggressively in terms of the red ocean problems.
Thank you for that segue. So yeah, whether we are talking mobile, I guess when you think of discoverability and the red ocean, you think of crowded app stores, I think anyone who is developing for PC and Mac and Linux knows that places like Steam are also fairly crowded places, and increasingly on console. And obviously, we're gathered here, we're not the first people in the world to talk about discoverability. So I guess that's where I wanted to start with my questioning. You know, how is that landscape of getting noticed changing? Is standing out in a crowded market the same old challenge, only harder, or has there been a shift? Is the challenge in any way distinct compared to, say, discoverability 4 or 5 years ago?
Okay. I remember when we did our first game at Play Manila. It was a game we spent a lot of time on, and we were all convinced it was going to be like the next hit. It was not Quiz Up, it was before Quiz Up. It was like a children's game. And back then, this is like 5 years ago, we were told the only thing that really matters is to get in with Apple and get on that front page, because they control what's popular and what's not. And if you're on that front page, if you're featured with Apple, you're golden. And that's what we believed, blindly. And we, just because of that, we decided to go with a publisher instead of self-publishing the game, because we thought that, hey, if we go with a publisher, that's going to be the key to getting noticed. It's going to help us, because we were just a small team in Iceland, it's going to help us get to Apple, and they're going to feature us. And they did. And I was the happiest man in the world for like a day until I saw the downloads. It really didn't work. And I think that the overemphasis that people put in being featured by Apple, of course, it does increase your downloads. But what we found out with QuizUp, for example, is that we got the same feature for QuizUp when we launched QuizUp as we did the previous game. But the difference there was just in the game mechanics. And I think still, and we're going to talk a lot about this, I think still, no matter how all the virality hooks you put into a game, or all the sharing possibilities, or the invite system and all of that, the best way to ever get, discovered is not through the App Store, it's by your friend that loves the game and he tells you to download it. So I think you just, close the lid on that topic then.
I'm joking.
Next question.
I mean, it would be interesting in a way to pitch it your way, Sean, in terms of, I think it's fair to say, quite a few people discovered World of Tanks. But then Wargaming as a company has branched out in many new directions. Is having a brand like like World of Tanks enough, or did you guys find new discoverability challenges?
Well, I think just talking about discoverability in general, I think there's various different things that are pointing up or down. And what I mean by that is, yes, for example, in mobile, the indicators are down in the sense of there's so many players in the space, there's so many competitors that the indicator's going down. But at the same time, if you look at the overall market and how the market's growing and whatnot, it's a positive trend. I mean, there are a lot more accessible potential users out there. There's so much potential growth in South America, Southeast Asia, Middle East, whatnot. Some markets are a little bit more saturated than others, but those indicators are really good. I think we briefly touched upon it in our briefing before, but there are tools that are coming up, such as streaming or esports or various influencers, whatnot, that we didn't have a couple of years ago. And I think if you're very smart in terms of leveraging those tools, you can, I think, help mitigate some of the discoverability problems. Going back to your question about the brand, I think the brand is critical. The brand is extremely important. I think anybody who works with any kinds of brands needs to understand the importance and nurture it. I think there are two separate things, though. There's World of Tanks, for example, as a product brand, and there's Wargaming as a corporate brand. I think depending on certain markets, we benefited from the corporate brand. And I think certain brands like Blizzard or Supercell and whatnot have benefited from that as well. I'll give you an example. You go to China, if Supercell launches a new game, a lot of local users know Supercell, the corporate brand. And so they're willing to try a new game that Supercell releases. We don't have that luxury in China. Nobody knows Wargaming because we work with a local publisher, and they know that publisher, they don't know us. So we don't benefit from that from a multi-product launch perspective. But for example, in Europe or Russia or certain other markets, if we launch another product, it does help with discoverability and user acquisition. So I think the point is, whether it's a product brand or a corporate brand, I think you do need to think about the value it does bring to the discoverability problem.
If anyone wanted to elaborate on that.
There's also just more things you have to do to stand out now, kind of like peripheral things that you have to stand out. For example, starting building up hype, starting building up community, starting building up like the streaming people, the streaming social thing. There's just way more you gotta be doing except just crossing your fingers and hoping you'll get featured. Right? You're gonna have to start like way earlier on that. I mean, you did it really well with QuizUp. You have to get like start getting featured streamers, like talking to the streaming community, going onto the sites like Twitch and Mobcrush and those things.
I can jump on this a bit as well. I mean, when we were setting up Raw Fury, a lot of people we talked to thought we were absolutely crazy because, and the question we got multiple times was, what do you mean PC first, premium only? That makes there's nonsense, right? You should be doing mobile, free-to-play, obviously. But we had, I think we from this perspective, right, from the marketing perspective, we'd seen two things. One was the rise of the content creators, right, and the how people now consume media. And that's an obvious, and they have an obvious tendency to like PC and like premium titles, console titles, right? And the other thing is working with small dynamic teams and small, relatively small like budgets, right? Because that also limits, you're quicker to success, right? With that sort of scope than for example, a AAA game or a huge multiplayer game or something of that nature, right? So I think it's also trying to be smart about like what thinking about the limitations you have and how you can use them to your advantage, right?
Sure.
Definitely, if you have those limitations, if you have a small budget, you get more creative and like you find ways to work with that. And that's what you need for discoverability. You need like new ideas because people are becoming quickly jaded with the kind of old discovery tips and tricks. Yeah. I think they're out there.
Well, I think, you say the word discoverability and user acquisition, and you start to think about cost per user and effective cost per user and effective actual cost per user and all those things, but acquiring users is otherwise known as getting people to play your game, right? It doesn't have to be these complicated systems. And you mentioned kind of limitations. I think, I'm sure everyone in this audience is going to be a millionaire from their game, but for the people out there in smaller teams for now or smaller budgets, it would be interesting to hear what you can do. And Jana, with Stugan, you worked with or incubated smaller teams. What did you see there about kind of the lessons of maybe getting your game noticed when you don't have a user acquisition budget to buy users?
Definitely, as I think Jonas mentioned that you got to be creative when you don't have a budget for that. I think one important thing is that a lot of indies don't think about this until the game is actually launched, and then usually it's late. They're basically praying to get featured. That's the thing they're really hoping for. But then, as they learn, that doesn't necessarily solve their problem. So it's. From our point of view, it's important to show them that that's actually something they should think about early on, and there is a few things you can do with no budget. You can be very active on the social media. You can start building your fan base and really be very very active and think about a lot what you're promoting, what you're tweeting, what you're writing on your Facebook. Then you can also You can go to events, you can try to contact journalists and meet with them, and that basically costs you nothing. You just need to be good at building relationships with the journalists. Make sure that you have something to share with them. You have something that's newsworthy. That's very important, as I guess you would agree, that when somebody approaches you, you want people to actually have something that you can write about. Mm-hmm. And that's very important to think about your story. What is it that you're doing, or what is your background? What is the game that you're doing, and those things.
If I might add, for a small team, I remember before we launched QuizUp, we had the same problem. We were a very small team, and we wanted to get, because QuizUp is like an online live multiplayer game, you had to have a critical mass of users just to see if it would work. So there's one other way that I often think about when I talk to small startups, and that's to try to get users through some sort of partnership. By partnering up with some sort of entity, be it Hollywood, although I don't have good recent experience of that, but still, it's funny. Our first, before we launched QuizUp, we actually partnered up with the studio Lionsgate in Hollywood, and they were just releasing their 4th installment of the Twilight Saga series. Wonderful series, I recommend it. And I remember we did like this Twilight QuizUp for them, and we basically just did it for free for them, and we didn't pay anything for it. But what they did is, because they had access to users, they had access to exposure, is that they put in one post in their Facebook page. I think it had like 40 million likers at that point. Like, Twilight fans are crazy. And the post went in, it's like, hey, have you tried the new Twilight QuizUp? How much do you know about Twilight? And it got like 150,000 likes within an hour. And it was like, we were mind blown. And we got like 1 million users in a week from that. And that was totally free. Just, again, like, there are lots of big companies with good ways to market, good channels, and just make something that's fun for them, and they can help you if you do it right.
And now they kind of recognize the small studio as worth working with, right? I sometimes sense small teams are a bit meek about approaching big brands and traditional entertainers.
I think that one thing that I at least have learned from this journey that I've had is that don't be afraid to approach the big guys. You know, that's, as I said, the first game I did, we didn't approach Apple ourselves. We just went through a publisher because it sounded like Apple was this impenetrable fortress that you couldn't get in. Mm-hmm. And then the second time around, I just went to San Francisco and we knocked on their doors, and they were actually, okay, I'm not going to say they were very pleasant, but they were kind of pleasant, and it worked. So yeah, don't be afraid to approach those big guys.
I think I'd like to add to that. It's in addition to all the creative things you can do and all the out-of-the-box thinking you can do, I want to emphasize that particular point in terms of there are people out there who have big brands, large user bases, certain financial capabilities, certain know-how, experience, whatnot, that you should really try to tap into. And I think especially the smaller teams out there, whether they're shy or they don't know someone or they don't know how to approach it and whatnot, I think a bit more emphasis needs to be put in, especially by the small teams, to think about their strategy in terms of partnering or finding allies or support among the various people out there or teams out there. I mean, having been at Tencent and Wargaming, you know, it would be easy for you to assume that, oh yeah, the big guys know everybody and they've already talked to anybody they care about. That's not true. I mean, it doesn't matter if you have an army of people. I mean, Tencent has an army of people around the world, yet there's so many talented teams and ideas out there that they cannot even cover. Same goes for myself. As Wargaming, I look at global opportunities, but just coming into Slush Play, there was a super cool space game team out there that I'd never even heard about. And they didn't reach out to me. I found them by chance. I'm going to follow up with a phone call next week. But things like this, it's really important for you to think more about not just developing your product or service or thinking about communities, whatnot, but think also from a B2B angle. Think really long and hard about leveraging that channel, getting to know people. If needed, hire agents or advisors who can help you along. It's worth the effort, and I would recommend that very strongly.
This is definitely something that gets kind of forgotten, especially with indie teams, because they kind of just want to lock themselves in and like make their dream. So they don't like dedicate a person to going being like the biz dev guy or the biz dev girl who goes out there and does those things, because it takes a lot of effort though. Like there's a lot of following up on stuff, and there's like finding out who these people are. So that definitely gets overlooked. And like in discoverability, like you're mentioning, it's like licensed IPs are like kind of a way to hedge yourselves against like the cost per install thing. So like if you license like whatever, that's one of the tricks that's like in the book. But then it's you're kind of sacrificing your creativity a little bit.
But
by
then I
doing
guess
that
you
as
get to
well,
state your status as a studio, you know.
like a first project for a studio. That's really good to do. But
I still remember the look on my programmer's face when I got back from Hollywood, and I said, "Guys, we have a dream opportunity here. We're doing Twilight. You know the movie? It's a vampire movie with young
Sexy werewolves.
Twilight." Yeah, I don't think they were not rejoicing in. It was especially awkward when we went to the premiere, and it was like me and 4 or 5 adult engineers, all male, and we sat down in Iceland. There were only ocean of 15-year-old girls around us, and it was just weird, you know.
But that project helped establish your studio in terms of Quiz Up.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Jana, you were about to...
Yeah, I was just going to point out about that the indies, they don't really think about the business and they don't have a basic guy, but there's also a budget thing that they don't really have. They can't afford to have an extra person who thinks about that. So usually it's the CEO who has to do that, and that person usually has no experience with business, so yeah, they're kind of struggling.
I want to just coming back to the kind of the topic at hand, right? The red ocean and surviving in that, right? A lot of it has also to do with you know, what's your ambition? What are you trying to achieve? Because there's obviously going to be a difference if you're going to make the next wargaming, right? Or if you're going to make the you know, the next Nexon or you know, whatever it is. That's going to be a whole nother game to play, no pun intended, than if you're just trying to fund, you know, your studio for 3 or 4 years to make cool games with your 4-man team, right? It's going to have a lot of impact on how you need to think about these things, right? So you also have to be aware of, like, what are you actually trying to achieve and do? Because, for instance, I mean, we're now, like my partner Colm just said on the stage a little while ago, unannounced, but we've just signed a game that's mobile first, and it's a premium game, right? And for that game, we are super confident that it will, like, be profitable. It will actually sell pretty well. It's a fantastic game, and obviously that has to be the base, right? It has to be a fantastic game. But we also know it's not going to be this, you know, it's not going to hit the top 10 charts of you know, grossing revenues worldwide. It's not going to do that, but it doesn't need to do that. It doesn't need to do that. So that's how you can also survive in the, you know, the red ocean.
Yeah, yeah. And in terms of, you know, rising to the top or standing out in the red ocean, I mean, Jana, you mentioned journalists. Speaking as a video games journalist, I can tell you what horrific creatures we are. But being sincere, like, is that meaningful anymore? I promise I won't take offense. Like, does getting, you know, I guess the other thing is worth bringing up is those YouTubers that do the journalism without words. Like, is it worth worrying about people like me?
I think it's definitely worth it, but it's not going to drive installs or a customer base. But it's going to establish credibility for your product. I think that's kind of what I saw with my our last title is that we got great press. We got like 9 out of 10 gold Pocket Game Awards, Touch Arcade, like featuring all of that. And what it did, it is like if we saw when, like, okay, this article got posted, and then there's like the graph of installs, and you try to kind of correlate the two. Like there's like a slight bump when those things get posted, but they do establish like credibility with, for example, the YouTubers, like with the streamers. So they go to those sites and they read your stuff, and then they go off and like play the game. So they drive a lot of traffic actually, like.
I can absolutely verify that that's true, what Otto is saying. There is the symbiosis of between the content creators and the journalists. So the importance is very much still there, but where it is important has changed. But it's still important.
I think we have the same experience. We didn't, when we got like the articles we wanted, like a cool article in the New York Times or like at a very prestigious publication, we almost didn't see any bump in downloads for Quiz Up. We did get it when there like a different kind of public, like when BuzzFeed did something that was like really shared a lot. We saw some bump, but by far the biggest thing that where we've seen like a significant bump in downloads has been in YouTubers. And the funny thing is that we tried to like pay a lot of YouTubers, and we got lots of celebrity endorsements. That went okay, but I remember like I think it was like half a year ago or something, our dashboard with our downloaded numbers, suddenly it like jumped up 100,000 new users more that particular day. And we were, what? What's happening? We had no idea. And it turns out they were all coming from Brazil. Turns out this one Brazilian YouTuber was, just found the game with nothing to do with us, and he started to play it online as an esport, so to speak. And then other YouTubers kind of picked it up, and we had like a massive influx of Brazilian users for like a month. And it was pretty organic, so yeah.
Sure. I think I'll give you an honest opinion if you promise not to write a bad review.
Yeah, don't worry.
For the
I'm
next
not in
5 years.
mode.
I think the general consensus among this group, and I'm sure among the audience here, is that yes, it is still valuable, but I think the emphasis is on the still part. I think the general trend definitely is traditional media, not just in gaming, just in general. Traditional media is in turbulent and challenging times, trying to find the relevance it used to have. I think the rise of social networks, and particularly development of technology, allows more and more normal people to have influence. Hence the rise of the influencers, whether YouTubers, streamers, or whatnot, who have immense influence compared to even the highest Pulitzer Prize winning journalists. And so from that perspective, I think where it does have, for me especially, a lot of value is from a B2B perspective. I think journalists and the specialized knowledge and expertise you have in covering certain topics are immensely valuable. As a, for example, trade journal perspective. I think for regular consumers, I think the days of gamers reading, gaming magazines or articles and getting information about that, I think that's slowly dissipating away. So what as a suggestion to you is I would focus a bit more on B2B and the trade side and charge businesses a ton of money, because we'll pay a lot of money for that.
I used to be editor of Develop magazine, a trade magazine, and I almost found that was where things I'd write about would get the most traction, not necessarily to the consumer, but the industry reading about you. And then when you go and talk to the guys making that game, it may be because you read about them in trade stuff, and trade journalism isn't read by many people, but it's read by the industry, who might be your future partners, or who might say, oh, meet this person, and so on. And don't worry, I won't take it. I'll cry myself to sleep tonight, Sean, but I won't take offense.
Definitely the industry press is kind of read by these kind of super connected people who kind of then disseminate it to other people. But just to give some context, because we've mentioned featuring and YouTubing, a single YouTube video drove as many installs for us as the Google front page feature.
Wow, yeah. And something I know I'm not one of the experts here, but you mentioned the Brazilian YouTuber. A pattern I see again and again from traditional journalism transferring to YouTubers is smaller YouTubers picking up, and then it climbs up the YouTuber chain. It seems maybe targeting the smaller YouTubers is what gets you to PewDiePie rather than going direct. I don't know if anyone else has seen that experience.
And I don't think there's like a formula to reaching the YouTubers. I just think you have to be sincere with these people, because these are people like the smaller ones that you kind of, that should be your gateway into the YouTubing world, right? Should be going with these smaller ones. These are people who are doing this just because they're sincere and they're doing this out of their kind of own volition. And you can only approach them with being like sincere in turn as well. Like you can't approach them with just like.
The thing is that we paid a lot of people, and we also got lots of coverage where we didn't pay. And the funny thing is, there is almost no correlation between how much you pay them and how many installs you get. There's like, it was like just weird. I mean,
payment is not a guarantee.
Payment is not a guarantee, and we even like did some celebrity sponsorships when we released a big update. We got, what's his name? Some Hollywood actor, don't remember. Okay. Anyway, he's a big actor.
That one.
And we paid him like $100,000. Crazy to like tweet and to put on his Facebook post. And we got like a lot. And we have these like links that follow it. And we got very disappointing results because he wasn't in it. He just his manager told him, "I'll put this on," and he probably never played the game. And yeah, Frank. What's his name? Yeah, I know. I hate it that I can't remember the name of that particular. James Franco, that was the guy. Yeah, so I don't think he even tried the game, but he like said, "Hey, try out this awesome quiz game out," and it even had a disclaimer that it was an ad, so it was just horrible. But yeah, so.
Yeah.
I think there is kind of a formula when it comes to content creators. We dislike paying them, and here's the reason. It's not about the money. It's about what you just mentioned, Tor, the engagement with the game. Because most of these guys are huge gamers, right? They're doing it because they love games, and you wanna attract people that that actually like what you're doing, right? And like playing it, because that's gonna shine through. That's where they really attract their audience, and that's where their engagement comes from. So you want that. You also want to be. You don't want to be you want to be as open. Treat these people like they're people, right? Be open. Support the smaller ones, absolutely, right? As long as, our policy is very simple. As long as you actively are creating content, we don't care if you have 1 subscriber or 1 million subscriber or 10 million. It doesn't matter. We will, we will support you in making the content for the game, right? So be inclusive. Talk to everyone. And if you're reaching out to them, you are actually going out to them, make sure you're targeting people that are playing and are likely to like the game that you're sending them, right? Mm-hmm. Don't spam them. Just target.
Yeah.
Much better.
I think I would fully agree with all of those comments. However, I would like to point out that the influencers are very rapidly evolving into businesses. And so I think the days of just purely passion-driven kind of influencing or broadcasting or streaming will still be there. But the more influential influencers are rapidly evolving into businesses that will consider a transaction for the influence that they have, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's one point to make. I think to your point about the money doesn't guarantee influence or downloads, I fully agree with that. I think if you take a step back though, you could think about which broader areas you want to be allocating your fixed budget on. So everybody, whether you're small or big, you have fixed budget. You can either spend all that money on magazine ads, or you could allocate it smartly. You could allocate it smartly in doing innovative, creative ideas, or spending it on influencers, or coming to trade shows, or spending on biz dev budgets, whatnot. I think you can be smart about how you allocate those pools of budgets to certain directions that are, I think, going to be more effective vis-a-vis, let's say, more traditional ways of marketing. Mm-hmm.
Jana, going back to the Stugan project kind of being youthful small studios, and Stugan got a lot of press. Did that, I promise I'm not scrabbling about trying to justify journalists, did that seem useful to those kind of nascent small teams, that press, or?
Yes, I would say definitely yes. I had a talk yesterday here, and I was talking about the first game that was ever launched out of Stugan, and that's called Prism, and that was launched on iOS. And with Stugan, from the very beginning, we've aspired to get as much media attention to the project as possible, and we have a really great PR person who is helping us. He's a PR guru, and he's done a very good job. We basically got an article in all the big games publications, but also in Wall Street Journal and the Fortune magazine. And when Clint launched his game Prism, we like to think that it was also partially thanks to Stugan, and he also got a lot of media attention to that, and he got featured on the App Store, and the game made the top 10 list of top-selling apps on the iOS. So I believe that definitely it helped him.
And I guess, to move away from us horrible games journalists, YouTube is about sharing games, and that brings us to esports, which you brought up earlier, Sean, but I wondered how you see, not just on mobile, but I think it's interesting how esports works on mobile, because a lot of us think about esports being console and first-person shooters and high-end PCs and arenas, but how important is esports to swimming in the red ocean?
Well, I can talk about Wargaming's perspective on it. We value esports tremendously from multiple angles. One is from obviously from a marketing angle per se, from a user acquisition perspective, others from a community or retention perspective, and another aspect is a content perspective, and a couple of additional benefits from esports. The reason why I point these out is, for example, I think an easy way to think about esports is like flipping through TV channels. Sometimes, some of you probably turn on TV and you go straight to a channel that you like to go to. Sometimes you just flip through. I think it's similar in terms of when you go on Twitch or Hitbox or any of these kinds of esports streaming services, there was a good chance you might see something that you weren't planning on seeing because it's right there. Or you're flipping through some of the different channels and you notice a very interesting visual experience or a streaming casting experience where it's entertaining and you realize that, oh wow, here's an experience that was super cool I never knew about. I want to try this one, right? So from that perspective, the discoverability challenges can be helped a lot by having a focused esports strategy. Now, this does not mean every game needs to be an esports game. By no means am I saying that. But if your game is competitive, and if your game has certain core structures and elements that allow it to be esports friendly, then by all means, think long and hard about how you approach esports as an angle for acquiring users.
And I mean, Sean, you may or may not have been playing Clash Royale before this very panel. Like, and this is a question to all of you really, but how powerful do you see the potential of esports in mobile or stuff roughly approximate to esports?
I think there's one thing you have to kind of wrap your head around when talking about esports is that, sure, you have people who are playing the games, but they are kind of like the people who are on the NBA basketball team, but there's way more people who are actually watching the games, and that's where the actual monetization is happening. So kind of you have to start looking at it from the outside. So there's a whole ecosystem in esports which is like, who is hosting tournaments? So you could be having a business of hosting like mobile game tournaments. Who owns the teams? Like you are seeing like these Faker, who's like a superstar in League of Legends, right? He is just a big business. So like when you're talking about esports, you have to start looking at it from that side. I think it's going to be hard for people to because you need tournaments, right? So you need to be able to host these tournaments somewhere. And there are like people who do Clash Royale tournaments and all these kind of mobile tournaments. So, but somebody has to have that, right? So which kind of tournament platform are you going to stand on? And there's definitely going to be, in the next couple of years, there's somebody going to be kind of, hey, we're going to be the platform where you can build tournaments for your games. Yeah. Because somebody's going to provide that to all these kind of small indies who have these competitive games, but they don't want to like do tournament management and tournament PR and like prices and payouts and all that stuff. So
I do want to highlight one point that you brought up. It's slightly off topic from this panel's subject, but there are on YouTube, if I recall the most recent data, of the gaming channels, only about 1/3 of the viewers of the gaming channels are actually gamers. 2/3 don't even play those games. They're just viewing because it's entertaining, just like you're watching any kind of reality show or National Geographic Channel on some Foxes or something. And it gives us some food for thought in terms of thinking about, wait a minute, as video game developers and publishers, who exactly are our customers? It's a philosophical discussion, but the viewers are slowly evolving into your potential customer base, and it's something to think long and hard about.
I'm just looking forward to the esports decathlon or the esports Ironman, where you have to play League of Legends for 8 hours and then switch to Overwatch for 3 and then and then finish up like while drinking beer, playing something like Counter-Strike or something.
Chess boxing.
Yeah,
of
so that will be interesting when we get to that level.
And something else I wanted to talk about. Now, obviously, everyone at Slush Play, audience and stage included, is far too cool to talk about paid acquisition, but let's talk about it anyway. Like, is it still relevant? Is it still worthwhile? You know, I guess some very successful games owe a big part of their success to paid acquisition, but it seems kind of common to, I don't know, kind of look down one's nose at it. I'm sure I've been guilty of that too. So would anybody argue for or against paid acquisition as relevant?
If I might jump in, we did a lot of experiments with what they called incentivized downloads, which is basically paid acquisitions. I think that I think that the bigger games that have really nailed their monetization, especially in mobile, whether you look at Clash of Clans or Candy Crush or a host of games that have really gotten their lifetime value of each customer to a very high, point. This has made perfect sense to them. What happened basically a couple of years ago is that when a company found a formula for a mobile game and they saw that their average revenue for each user they got in was maybe $3 or $4, let's say that was very high, they just realized, hey, this is like a machine that just creates gold. Because we know that if we are certain that on average we get $4 per each user we acquire, we can spend up to $4 to acquire that user, and no one of the smaller guys can ever afford to pay $3 for a user, because that's a lot when you have lots of users. But it made sense when you knew exactly what your lifetime value was, and that's what's been, basically driving the user acquisition of all of those bigger games that are like the highest grossing games. That's just paid acquisition. And to that extent, it works. So if you really nailed your monetization and you've got great ARPDAU or great revenue coming from the game, of course it will make sense to buy users that cost you less than what you're making from them.
Everyone in
I think I would fully agree with that. It's the whole LTV minus CPI. Is it positive or not, right? And if you're confident behind that, like what Machine Zone's doing, you can buy out all the inventory and crowd out everybody else, right? So even if you believe in paid advertising or user acquisition, you can't even compete. So point number one is like, do you believe in it or not? Point number two is, can you even compete in that space, right? So I think, but I still believe that like natural discovery is very challenging. I think it is doable. You can be innovative in terms of how you do it. But I think for every game, I think it does make sense to at least kickstart some of your user base with some paid acquisition, because you do need a core, you do need a kernel of a base for all of these efforts to start paying off for you. And what I would emphasize is, and I think many of you guys already know this, but blind paid acquisitions I think are pretty wastes of money. All you're benefiting is all the ad agencies out there. But I think there are more techniques and metrics and abilities out there where you can target quality users. And if you can really target the quality users that you're exactly looking for, it may be a big base or maybe a small base, but I think those are definitely worth paying for.
Okay.
Again, it also goes to your scope and ambition. Like, what are you trying to achieve? And then it's also the definition of what is a user acquisition. Like, we don't spend money on that for our games, but we do go to consumer shows, right? And you're essentially doing the same thing. So that's also a way of acquiring users, right? Going to consumer shows, showing your games, allowing them to play them. You're spending money on that, and you're doing it because you want them to come and play the game, right? Yeah. So it's also what's your ambition and how you do it, right? Maybe depends on the game a bit and your size.
Yeah, that kind of watching your ambition point that you've made a couple of times is really interesting as well, because I've heard I've heard a good number of studios argue that so many people aim to be at the top 1% of the top 1% in mobile and kill themselves doing it, and you can be very successful and perhaps achieve that success more realistically, aiming a little further down the ladder. Is that, it would be ridiculous to say don't be ambitious, right? But at the same time, tempering that with a bit of realism can lead to better swimming in the red ocean.
I still think that the long tail of mobile, if you look at the top grossing, and you can't get them, but you can get estimates of the numbers behind each spot there in the top grossing, they fall unbelievably quickly. The grossing numbers for the top 5 compared to the grossing numbers for the 40 to 50 on that list, they're not even in the same ballpark. So I think that I don't have a scientific facts behind this, but I have a feeling that in mobile, the long tail is just, we know that it's unbelievably long, and most of it is not making money. It's a relatively small amount of titles that are doing it.
I guess it's probably time somebody at this conference brought up VR, so I'm going to do it. Is VR just another red ocean that's already crowded, especially relative to the modest user base at the moment, or is it this kind of wild blue ocean? You know, I guess I'm really wondering, is it something to rush to or something to be cautious about, whether you're talking mobile VR or console or desktop? This is the first time they've thought about VR, but so it's a...
In terms of mobile VR, I definitely see mobile VR taking off way before high-end VR, and I think it's going to be the elephant in the room that's going to drive mobile VR. So it's like a customer base that's willing to sacrifice from the content of the quality and is like wants to enjoy it in private. I'm talking about erotic content. I think that's probably going to be the driver for mobile VR to begin with, and then we can come in with the games after that.
But I also think, speaking of the mobile VR, that it's very easy for people to actually get into that, because you don't need to purchase hardware, you don't need to buy the whole HTC Vive and dedicate the whole room to that. You basically just need to buy, like, you know, hardware that doesn't cost very much, and everybody basically is a potential gamer because they have the smartphone in their pocket. And also one thing that I've heard that is a very interesting point is that if your PlayStation breaks down, it takes you months before you go and have it fixed, because it's not on your priority list. But if your phone breaks down, you make sure that you have a new phone like tomorrow, so you can live your life again, and therefore you can enjoy playing the games.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I hadn't thought of it that way, and I've definitely replaced my phone embarrassingly fast. I
don't know. I'm not. Look, this whole conference, Slush now, which is a wonderful conference, has all been about VR. So I don't think it's appropriate to be negative towards VR, which I'm not. I love VR. However, I'm afraid that it's going to take more time than most people will want for it to become mainstream, simply because of the dork effect. And that's the fact that when you put on something that kind of covers your head, it looks incredibly bad. And we've seen this happen with Bluetooth headsets, which everyone thought was like the next generation of how you would communicate. And it just looked really silly when people were using those. And it's not until Apple came up with those new ones that are coming now where it might get mainstream. I'm not sure. I don't think so even. Still looks kind of silly, but it's the same with the 3D glasses that came with your TV. I mean, remember, everyone was getting, and I'm not saying it's comparable to VR in any way. I mean, VR is wonderful and exciting, but I'm afraid that the threshold of putting something to cover all of your senses to get a great experience is going to take a long time to get mainstream. Just put that here.
VR is absolutely, it's a viable market, but again, it goes towards like, what are you trying to achieve, right? We just saw a VR game pass $1 million in its first month, right, just basically recently. So it's absolutely a viable market, and it's just going to grow. But yes, what are you trying to do, and what are you trying to achieve? And you have to be realistic about what that, if you call it an ocean, it's actually a technology, but you know. If we call it an ocean, how big is that ocean? Yeah. Right.
And you know, any more thoughts on how it helps you stand out? Is that, you know, I guess it feels so new and innovative, and at the same time, there's a lot of people moving in on it. So I wonder, just in a way, if it really does let you acquire users. By just, you know, if things like mobile and Steam are overcrowded and getting discovered, you know, it is...
It's just a small pool of users, though, that actually have the equipment. So it's probably, I don't know. Yeah. But there are already so many VR apps out there, right? Compared to the market group. So I don't know. Let's talk about AR on mobile.
Yeah.
I would also think that a typical VR user has like more titles that he pays for than a regular like mobile game. Right. I think it's a way more engaged user. He buys way more stuff. He tries stuff out because that's just the demographic. Like if you like dedicated your garage to be your like your wife room, right? Then you're gonna go off and buy more content. So like right now, you probably don't have to do a lot to stand out in VR because it's such a small pool and you have such an engaged customer base that they're going to go like hunting for you.
Great. I'm allowed to ask one dud question. Let's move on. I'm going to bring up AR. So obviously, there was that sensation that maybe us journalists were a bit guilty of hyping up of course, I'm talking about Pokemon Go. At the same time, I found myself arguing, MySpace and Friends Reunited did a wonderful thing in introducing what social media was so that Facebook and others could thrive. And hopefully Pokemon Go's done that in terms of introducing the consumer. But at the same time, it was a kind of limited version of AR. There's some exciting technologies that aren't quite too tangible yet. Is AR in general an opportunity to pounce on in terms of standing out and attracting users?
I think that I just want face detection glasses that have a camera and detect people's faces and tell me who they are. That would be awesome. That's my 2 cents. Okay.
I think that, if I can jump in, I recently tried the HoloLens, and that really blew my mind, even though it's still early days. But that really shows what AR could be like in the future. One thing that I don't like about VR so much is that you really close yourself in the VR world and you lose the contact with the world around you. But with AR, with the HoloLens, I still could see everybody in the room, yet I saw like the cool things like climbing out the walls and I could shoot them, and that was really something that I believe in strongly, and I think that that's where we're gonna go.
I think you're way too modest, Thor. I want the lenses that you graft onto your eyes and update with software, and 30 years from now it's like augmented human beings. That's what I want. So and that's literally what AR could potentially open up.
But if you have those lenses, you could actually have both AR and VR because they could take over all of your sight. So it's the same thing.
Let's make a company.
I think, a lot of us don't even know what VR is. That's kind of my one takeaway from this conference, is that basically no one knows what's ahead of us and nobody knows what they're talking about. Sorry, guys. But with AR, it's like even further out there. There's not a lot of people who have tried like actual AR. Like, you're probably the second person I know that's tried the HoloLens, and I'm in the games industry. But everyone's tried VR because it's like accessible. So AR is like way more ambiguous and a bigger unknown for, I think, all of us than VR is right now.
Although I would say I would agree with you that the AR is further away, but I think the way we can think about this in a structured way is, I feel it's not either or in some sense. I feel VR is a step towards AR, and I think all of the work that many of you guys are doing in the VR space is ultimately going to melt into what the ultimate AR experience is going to be. And at the end of the day, this distinction right now we're having in 2016 around, it's AR, VR. People in 2020, 2025 are going to look back at this time and start laughing because they're like, it's all the same anyway. Yeah. So that's my perspective. I think I'm probably one of the few people in here who've done HoloLens as well as Magic Leap. I think, yes, it's ambiguous, but I think what is clear is the disconnect we currently have with VR in terms of your wife or your daughter could be sitting right there. You'd be disconnected completely from that experience versus what AR is, which is much more, you're still connected, yet you're in this fantastic world that can be created by content creators. I think for me personally as a potential customer, I find that a lot more exciting because, I don't have enough time for my family already, and I don't want to be, sitting in front of a PC is already hard enough, right? Because they're sitting over there. Locking yourself out in a virtual world, I'm not Ready Player One, right? So I feel like AR is going to be much more widely accepted across a lot of different uses, and I'm very excited about the future of AR and appreciate all the work VR guys are doing to help us get there faster.
So AR is VHS and VR is Betamax? I dated myself.
On that very serious note, our time is up, I have had indicated to me. So we are going to have to wrap it up now. I'm sure the conversation will continue off the stage and throughout the day, but just to say thank you to our audience for your attention and for not just making us be sitting on a stage on our own, and thank you so much to the experts here for giving some insights. I hope they help with your success. and let's hope I can carry on finding some work as a journalist. So yeah, thank you for everyone. Thank you.